It's good to see everybody. We see a lot of common faces that have been at other our events and some new faces, so thank you for coming. I'd like to thank our sponsors, first of all, for this morning's program, and they are the Marsh & McLennan Agency, Sikich, and our booth sponsors are Davis & Kilthau and Lincoln Contractor Supply. Thank you to our partners and sponsors. Before we get started today with our awesome panel that we've assembled, I want to call up to the stage Nate Beck. He's the Daily Reporter staff writer who writes the word Foxconn about 40 times a day now. So he's pretty well versed in everything that's going on at Foxconn land. Nate?
Hey, how's it going? I'm Nate Beck. I'll just kind of walk you through really quick kind of where we're at with the project. You blink and you miss 5 things. So I guess as many of you know, Foxconn's already awarded 2 big projects. The first was site development work in May, as well as contracts for the first building on the site, which is a 120,000 square foot multi-purpose building. By our count, Foxconn has issued 72 contracts so far, 27 on the first project and 45 on the second building. So this doesn't count WISTOP projects that have already been released as well. The agency is expected to release about $500 million worth of work or more when you factor in Interstate 94 reconstruction as well as work on Braun Road and International Drive. So yesterday, and I guess this week here, Foxconn has had kind of some information sessions around the state, kind of outlining the next plan for the coming year, right? So basically, the company plans to issue 3 more big projects by the middle of next year, 2019. The first of those, which should be coming in the third quarter this year, is a bid for utilities and roadway construction. That includes like curb and gutter roads on the Foxconn project site, sort of in the first area of that. In addition to other kind of utility stuff, like water utility works that they'll have to coordinate with Racine County and the DOT, and a 250-watt substation, which is kind of a massive amount of power that project will need. Later on in the first and second quarter of 2019, the company expects to release its 4th bid for long lead material procurement, equipment, and specialty systems. Some of this stuff includes glass, rebar, aluminum for roofs. A lot of it's also very specialized, and it'll lean pretty heavily on the supply chain. Some of this stuff could even take up to a year to procure, the company said yesterday. The company also plans to install a $30 million zero liquid discharge system in the factory, which basically recycles water that it pulls from Lake Michigan and tries to turn as much of that into usable water without waste. The 5th bid, which will come, I guess, first or second quarter of next year. Sounds like a little bit later. It includes foundations, excavation for some of its buildings in the first area, and underground distribution. And Foxconn says that sort of this phase of the project will come sort of in multiple awards. It'll get sort of awarded with multiple bid releases. So I think that's kind of what we know of where Foxconn is at this point, and that doesn't take into account other development that's happening as a result. One example is a $117 million ATC substation that's going in near the plant to provide power. There's plans for, I guess, hospital nearby, and land uses, land prices are rising quickly in the Mount Pleasant area. I guess there's still some question of sort of what housing will look like. There's a little bit of skepticism from developers, apparently, because Foxconn hasn't released its wage scale. They've only said it's $53,000 on average or something. And I guess there's some skepticism among Racine County officials that developers are going to be willing to build a multi-purpose building in the neighborhood without having more specific information of sort of how much the average worker is going to make. Mount Pleasant, meanwhile, hasn't had a market rate apartment unit built in 20 years. So there's still quite a few unsettled questions, but that's kind of where we're at. So I'll pass the mic. Thanks.
Thanks, Nate. And if anybody has questions for Nate, he'll be around after, as well as any of the panelists. They have agreed to stick around after. So with that, we'll welcome up to the stage Dan Shaw. He's our managing editor at the Daily Reporter. He'll be the moderator for today's panel, and I'll get a chance to sit down. Thanks, Dan.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming again, and thank you once again to our distinguished panelists. Could you all introduce yourselves really quick? Maybe start with Kelly down there at the end and come down this way.
Thanks. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Kelly Armstrong. I'm a Sector Strategy Director with Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. And really what that means is I oversee and work with manufacturing across the state.
Hello, everyone. I'm David Bellman with Bellman Homes. I'm a single-family home builder, land developer, and realtor out of Waukesha County. I'm also the past president of the Metropolitan Builders Association and the Wisconsin Builders Association. So look forward to giving you guys some information about housing and land in the area and see how we can get some more affordable housing down there.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. My name is Jim Brandenburg. I'm a tax partner with Sikich. Sikich is an accounting and consulting firm. Our office is in the Milwaukee area up in Brookfield, but we also have offices in the Midwest and throughout the country. I work in the tax area with closely held businesses, providing tax consulting, mostly manufacturers in real estate, construction, other businesses, but we have a wide range of services that we offer for companies, not only their accounting and tax needs, but computer technology, HR, a number of other services. So again, we're looking forward to the presentation here today.
Thank you. Well, appreciate the opportunity to be here. My name is Elliot Lepoitovan with Marsh & McLennan Agency up in New Berlin. We are a nationwide risk management and employee benefits consulting firm providing services. One of our major verticals is construction, so certainly excited to be here today and talk a little bit about some of the value we're adding for clients looking at this job and in general.
Thank you. And let's get right to the topic at hand here, because we have a lot to talk about. I guess maybe start with Kelly down there at the end again. So please tell us about the Foxconn supply chain, what you know about it, and how the people in the audience can get involved.
Sure, absolutely. That is the number one question that we get across the board for sure. The best way to get involved is to go to the Supply Chain Marketplace website, which you will actually find on wisconvalley.gov. Has anybody been to the website? Anybody familiar? Anybody the first time they're hearing that? Good. Okay, just one. Okay, that's good. So the Supply Chain Marketplace is a great tool. It's a central database location that we're hoping and already actually using to be able to pull kind of initial lists. So, for example, when Foxconn or anybody else for that matter needs to be sourcing, let's say, a plastic injection molder, they can go to this database and source that, and they can pull by different variables, or they can pull a larger list or whatever and then start their own vetting process. But it's a great place to be able to pull that information. So whatever business you have, whatever services you're offering, we're going to encourage you to get registered on that website. There's no cost or anything like that. Just make sure that your information is accurate and up to date, especially with your point of contact and the actual information that you put in there in the services. What's really exciting about, well, there's a lot of exciting things about this project, but the $1.4 billion supply chain spend in Wisconsin that they've committed to, I believe their annual, when they're fully operational, their annual spend is going to be about $4.26 billion in supply chain. So we anticipate about $1.4 billion being in Wisconsin suppliers. Just to give you a sense of size of that, one of the examples that we use is the Oshkosh Corporation. And they do about $300 million annually in supply chain purchases from about 700 companies around the state of Wisconsin. So it's about 4 times the size of that. And we all know and love the Oshkosh Corporation. And but just to kind of give you some sense of size and scope, because this is the largest project that's ever landed, and we're certainly excited about that and all the other benefits that come with that.
Thank you. Yes, everybody should get on that website. I've been on it before. It's a wealth of information, as they say.
There is, and there's actually, I'm sorry, one more thing just on that. There is a newsletter there as well that you can sign up for that will give you regular updates on everything. Also for when they put out a procurement request for contract, those will be posted on there as well. So if you're not going to that website, I encourage you to stay regularly engaged with that website if that's what you're interested in.
Yes, certainly. And I think our next question is for Jim over here. It's that Foxconn is such a massive project for southeastern Wisconsin. It's been a major business story for the surrounding area. But the federal tax reform bill, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that passed last year, was a major story on the national level. What are some of the key provisions in this new legislation that impact businesses?
Yes, thank you. The tax bill that was last year was a significant comprehensive tax reform bill. Again, one of the first ones in 30 years that they had with it. And what Congress really looked at last year with this tax bill is really several themes with it, but one is to make the U.S. tax code more competitive with the rest of the world, so that we keep companies here or attract investment back in the U.S. instead of companies leaving. But then also one of the things was to create jobs and to grow the economy. And they did that with really several provisions that were pretty significant with it. First was just the cut in the tax rates. The tax rates for corporations, for C corporations, went from 35% down to 21%. And then for individuals that are part of what they call a pass-through business, partnership, or an S-corp, went from roughly 40% down to about 30%. So those significant reductions, again, that start right here in 2018 right away, which, again, that's a boost for business. Another change was 100% expensing for any of their capital expenditures or CapEx items that small business or large business, either one, can take advantage of. And again, that applies to new or used equipment that they're putting in. So that's a significant tax incentive for investing back in the business that's available now. There were some international changes that try to make the level the playing field they put in. And then last, for smaller business, again, smaller business being businesses with $25 million or less in business, they put a couple incentives for some accounting methods to maybe use the cash method of accounting or some inventory changes. So there's several incentives that are just geared toward small business that are in there. Again, all those are geared toward allowing these, again, large or small businesses to retain some of the additional funds, have less go out in taxes so they can reinvest or hire more and expand and grow the business. And I think we've seen some of that. And again, most of those are effective right away in 2018.
Of course, we have a lot of employers in this room or out of Wisconsin. What if I'm an employer in Wisconsin, what provisions should I be paying attention to most particularly? Yeah,
I think there's several things that are in there. First, one is, again, that 100% being able to write off some of their fixed asset, their capital expenditure items, a significant benefit. Again, number of businesses, contractors or manufacturers in the area always looking to expand into their business and be able to write that off in the year that they acquire it is a significant benefit for them. So that's one I think that a lot of are taking advantage of starting here in 2018. Some that may have some additional business that's generated is because of the Foxconn. So they've got new business work that they're doing, and they've got some tax rules that may help them with that. Another thing just to point out for some, again, I think especially for some in the manufacturing area, a couple items that were not in the tax bill last year, some incentives, and that I guess is a good thing because there's some incentives that were out there that were not affected by the tax bill. One is the R&D tax credit for companies that get new and improved technologies. That credit is still available. And for some that use the LIFO inventory method that really benefits if there's rising costs, that's still available. There was some speculation that LIFO may go away. That was not part of the tax bill. So those are some incentives that are still out there that were not affected by the tax bill. So again, some companies should, especially in Wisconsin, a lot of them do take advantage of the R&D credit and that LIFO inventory.
And with all the money that some businesses are now saving, what are you seeing them do with it most often?
Yeah, with some of the savings that they're getting, there's a variety of things that some of the companies can take advantage of with it. Some, I think where in the bill passed, you heard some of these companies were paying some bonuses out to some of their employees. I think you're seeing some with that in that, their workforce is an important part of their business, so some are, paying bonuses or reviewing their compensation packages or maybe some additional retirement incentives. But others are taking some of that, buying new equipment with it. Maybe some are paying down some debt they have, or others are looking at acquisitions they can make to grow their business, whether it's a new line of business or maybe geographically they're growing. So, or it could be a combination of some of those factors that companies are looking at with it. It's not necessarily each company is going to do the same thing with whatever the savings that they're seeing. So,
Yeah.
It's a good mix of it.
Right, yeah. So probably welcome windfall for some, or windfall is probably too strong of a word, but welcome influx of money. Of course, if you're making money on the Foxconn project, you have to worry about paying taxes, but before you make money on the project, you have to first be able to work on it. You have to be properly bonded. You have to get the proper sort of insurance. That's why we have Elliot here today to talk about that a little bit. What do contractors who want to work on this project need to know about when they're thinking about insurance?
Sure. Thank you. I appreciate it. Happy to speak to the question as long as everyone promises to stay awake as we get into the weeds on insurance. So, although you were talking about tax, so I'm probably a close second.
Good act to follow.
A couple of the real important things in any contract, for that matter, is what the language is asking you to have as far as an insurance program structure. So, we see a lot of the common requests around additional insured, waiver of subrogation, the different limits of the types of coverages that you need to have in there. And oftentimes the endorsements in today's market are adapting to that language, but sometimes they're not. And particularly on a project this size, there's some important things to look out for. If we get into the space that Gilbane and Foxconn decide to make this into a OSIP or a CSIP, we're going to have some completed ops exposures that contractors need to be thinking about in their general liability and umbrella programs. On the additional insured side, we always recommend putting a blanket on there so you don't miss anything and making sure that goes up and downstream. So there's a couple issues with, again, some of the endorsements in the marketplace today that aren't adapting to contracts the way that contractors need them to. Another challenge I think some of the contractors may have, and for instance, or for that matter, anyone going on site would have, is getting the limits that the job might require. And so oftentimes that might require going into the E&S market and building a tower for a specific job. Or I know having attended one of the listening sessions with Gilbane and MW Group, they're looking at partnering a lot of contracts out. So I'd certainly advise folks looking at this job to be cautious about how those ventures are structured. If you get into the joint venture space, again, we're going to see some exclusionary language on most general liability policies. So from that perspective, I'm happy to get further in the weeds one-on-one after this, but I think those are probably the broad stroke items that I would advise people be looking out for.
Yeah, we will have a question and answer session, I believe, so anyone has a question on that particular, ask it then. Now, I think Nate touched on this a little bit in his opening remarks, and one thing that I've been scratching my head a lot about is you're going to have 13,000 workers in this factory, you're going to have 10,000 workers building the factory. Where are they all going to live? Because they don't all really all live in Mount Pleasant, obviously. So, David, if you want to talk a little bit about, how we're going to find housing for all these workers.
It's going to be very challenging, and when you add that much volume, and especially in our industry for home building, we have went from, the recession, and we went from what I'd call a drip to a pour, and we went from being kind of slow and losing half our labor force to now being very busy building homes. And then you add on a project of this size. I got a friend here, a fly. But you add a project of this size to the area, and it really makes things challenging. So one of the things that's happening right now is that we're having an affordability concern. And you look at the average wage for Foxconn, and those workers make $53,000 on average from what we're told. When you start to work that backwards, you'll see that they can maybe afford a $350,000 house. Unfortunately, for a new home build, that's really not realistic right now, given a lot of different things, and I think that you've got a question about that later, so we can kind of cover that. But affordability is really an issue. So I think a lot of the demand and the need for housing, at least initially, is going to come from apartments. And I think that's really where, especially if you're a new worker coming in, new job, I don't know necessarily that they're going to want to buy a house immediately. I think maybe an apartment does make sense, just because they can kind of get familiar with the area. And I think there'll be like a halo effect. So I think we're going to see people, moving into different communities, and they'll be commuting there. We're going to have a lot of workers coming from out of the area, I believe, as well for this company. So, they're probably not going to be very familiar with our market, and they're going to want to kind of figure out where they want to live first. But the affordability is really, I think, the number one concern, and I think that's why you're not seeing a ton of stuff yet, and a lot of developers from my area have kind of avoided it at the moment, just because they don't think they can fit the need with the current environment.
Yeah, he talked a little bit about, Nate talked about haven't had market rate apartments built there in 20 years. I don't know if you have any sense of what apartment developers are thinking, but are they showing more interest than home builders in building down there?
Well, I've kind of studied the raw land in the area, and I've looked at Kenosha and Racine County especially, and I'm seeing a lot of land being purchased. So there certainly is a lot of transactions. I mean, we're seeing big pieces of land, 10, 12, easily up to 15 a year being purchased now in that market. If you go to like Waukesha County, like through MLS, you might only see a couple. So there's definitely a lot of land transactions. So I think people are obviously buying those assets and kind of looking to see what they can do. So I mean, I think apartments are really the first area of need, and where we really need to focus on first. And then I think housing will grow eventually there, but I guess kind of diving into that topic just a tad more, the reason why housing is unaffordable right now is that we have what I call 4 limiting factors for housing. So it's the 4 L's are lumber, labor, lots, and legislation. And those 4 things are what's holding the affordability back on housing. So there's a lot of different reasons. I can jump into those reasons if you like. So.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Sticking to the script here, though, you did talk about the impacts that are going to come with the project, which leads into the next question for Kelly, which is not just apartments that are obviously going to be built, but what other sorts of projects do you think are going to be built around this $10 billion factory? Obviously.
Sure. Well, grocery stores, gas stations. No, we'll go into more. Sure. No, it's a tremendous economic impact, right? There are right now, even though we're still in the very early construction phase, there's already 136 different companies from 24 different counties that have received contracts, and the contract number I have is 223 as of July 30th, 2018, is how many contracts have been let for infrastructure and construction. So just to give you a sense of that. A recent study that was done by the MMAC, which is the Milwaukee Manufacturing Organization, that there's an estimate of $51 billion that will be added to Wisconsin's GDP over the next 15 years. So that's quite a bit of influx, not only in people, but in hard dollars and tax dollars and all of that. I can't actually speculate as to what types of businesses will be built, but anytime you have a project come in like that, obviously housing is important. And the other economic measure that gets talked about a lot is induced and indirect jobs. And induced and indirect spend. And what that means is you have your direct spend, which is Foxconn comes in and hires you, and that's direct jobs, direct dollars, and then you go out and buy your groceries and buy your gas, and that's indirect. And then induced is when the gas station owner goes out and buys his groceries and buys his house and buys his gas. And those are induced jobs. So we look at that as from a jobs number, but also from an investment dollar too. And those numbers are quite significant as well. The recent study that was done by the University of Wisconsin in Madison estimates between 32 and 39,000 of induced and indirect jobs that will result from that. So that is quite a lot of growth. And obviously, that's going to happen, and I don't have an estimate of what the radius of that is, but it will happen here, but it's also going to happen in a radius that kind of permeates out from here as well. Because as you said, not everybody's going to be able to live right here, so you'll see that spread across. And well, we're excited to see that the commitment to the suppliers in Wisconsin, but what that means also is the commitment to hiring the labor force in Wisconsin as well. So all of that will be a part of those numbers and the investment.
Yeah, I'm sure I've seen that figure before, 32 to 39,000, but that's astonishing numbers. But on that subject, where we're going to find these workers, of course, one of the biggest difficulties in this industry, any industry it seems like these days, is finding people who are qualified to do the work and retaining them. Is there anything in the recent tax bill, Jim, that will help train workers and retain them?
Yes, for businesses, as you mentioned, both manufacturers, contractors or others, one of the biggest issues is just finding and attracting and retaining their talent, their workforce with it. I often hear that one of the biggest impediments for a business from growing is just getting that workforce in place to be able to help their, whether it's a manufacturer or contractor, just having the workforce. They could grow more, but they don't have enough people for it. And I think that situation is probably going to continue over the next several years. Again, we're going to have existing businesses starting to grow, other companies coming into the area as this Foxconn project continues on. And I think the pressure on the workforce is going to continue on with it. So I think one of the key things for some of these businesses is, what can they do to not only find these employees, but to keep them and retain them with it, whether it's their compensation and benefit package, they're going to be a key part of that so that they can have those employees. One of the things that was in the tax bill that was offered, and it starts here in 2018, is, again, many companies not only have their regular benefit package, but under state and federal law, they have to provide off family medical leave for their employees if they're out, but oftentimes that may be not paid time off that they get. What the new tax law put in is if they pay their employees with it, a certain amount with it, they can get a tax credit back for the company if they have a paid family medical leave one. So what you may see some companies is looking to either put that in or expand that a paid family medical leave program in. So one, it may be a popular benefit with some of their employees, but two, they may get a tax benefit with it as well. So that's one for some of the companies to look at for this coming year. We need some guidance from the IRS on it, but something to be aware of.
Yeah, very nice. And piggybacking on that subject, go back to Kelly and talk about, I know that training, job training is a priority for the current administration. Your agency is doing things in that regard, so are other state agencies. But what is WDC doing to help?
Sure. So workforce and the labor is the number one issue in economic development today. Obviously, in Wisconsin, is not alone in that we have such a low unemployment rate, and you also have this, I believe they call that the silver wave, but you have so many people that are expecting to be retired fairly soon, and how do we augment that? So the first thing I would say from a manufacturing standpoint, and we get a lot of questions from manufacturers, how do I become a supplier, right? Well, the first thing you need to do is you have to be digitally ready. And there's a lot to that, so we have quite a bit of plans around how to help manufacturers across the state get digitally ready. And I can talk more about that later. But on the labor piece, so we partner with the Department of Workforce Development, and we also have a new initiative that we have partnered with not only the Department of Workforce Development, but also the Department of Veterans Affairs. And it's a talent attraction around Think, Make, Happen. And it's looking at targeting millennials, UW alum, and also veterans. So there's a roughly 200 to 250,000 veterans retiring out of the, or I should say transitioning. They are retiring, but when we say that, that leads to maybe a specific mindset. But there are 200 to 250,000 veterans transitioning out of the military service on an annual basis. And so part of that is, how do we target? Those are great workers. We know they've got a solid work ethic, and how do we get them to translate into the civilian world? And then how do we get them to come to Wisconsin and love Wisconsin if they've maybe never been or haven't had that experience. So this is a great partnership opportunity that we're going out. There'll be some private companies that are part of that as well. It's a great opportunity to get involved and have direct conversations with potential people that are looking for a home. You know, when you're transitioning out of the military, where am I going to go? Am I going to go back to where I'm from? Am I going to go where there's job opportunity? So our message is we've got jobs and we want you here. So that's a great initiative that's happening right now. In addition to that, obviously the UW system is a tremendous partner, along with all the universities in the state. We have a designated position that is in partnership with UW that is specifically focused on talent attraction. And a big chunk of that is also working with UW alum outside of the state to bring them back. You're always better off showcasing your natural assets and somebody that's already experienced how great Wisconsin is, right? And in addition to that, working with our regional economic development organizations as well. And so those are kind of some main areas around what we're doing with talent attraction, but it is more than just us. And there's some opportunities there for companies to be able to utilize and leverage some of those marketing materials as well as you're reaching out and doing your HR and trying to recruit your individual people here. So if you're interested in that, let us know. We'd be happy to get you connected with that as well.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I'm sure that some people will take advantage of that service. I guess, spent the last few minutes here talking about one of David's L's, labor. I believe the other ones are litigation, lots, and
Legislation.
I almost passed the quiz. But anyway, you talked about this at another one of our events, and you were starting to touch on it just a moment ago. But what are some of the main reasons why new homes are so unaffordable, especially to first-time home buyers?
And I hate to use this word, but I feel like we're approaching sort of a housing crisis for affordability, and it's just really gotten out of hand. And you know, we have a lot of things going on because obviously the existing homes are selling very, very well, and you know, we're seeing less than 4 months of inventory. Healthy market is 6 months, so people aren't finding what they like on the existing market. They come to us to look to build. And there's a lot of sticker shock on the cost of new construction. And like I mentioned, there's the 4 limiting factors. So the first one is lumber. And if you haven't been watching the news, you'll see, obviously, I'm sure you all have, all the tariffs and the talk of that. So we had a 20% tariff on lumber. Now, nationwide, we don't get quite as much lumber from Canada as we do in Wisconsin. We get almost 80% of our lumber right now from Canada. And so that tariff is very painful for us. And unfortunately, that 20% tariff is not what we're seeing in the field. We've actually seen, like nationally now, almost a 60% increase in the cost of our lumber. So there's other things going on, I believe, and I was just at a national meeting in Portland last week, and they were talking with various departments in Washington. They actually believe there's some collusion going on in the pricing with the sawmills in Canada and different things.
Word.
What's that?
Watch out for that word, collusion.
Yeah.
So. One.
Yeah, and for the departments to be mentioning that's pretty interesting. So there's been a lot of work going on that, and we've actually seen a softening a little bit in the last couple weeks on lumber prices. So hopefully we'll get some more relief there. The second factor why houses are not quite as affordable as they should be is the labor, and you mentioned that, and we're feeling it especially in the trades because a lot of the younger people. They've basically lost the trade programs in their schools. And so we have almost a generation now of kids that haven't been exposed to trades or shop classes and things like that. And we lost half our labor force during the recession. They went and got manufacturing jobs or day jobs because construction work can be seasonal. It can be kind of very busy at times and slow at times. So that's a huge issue. So glad to hear you're working with veterans. That's a soft spot of mine. And they make great construction workers. So we definitely need to connect there on that. And then land is the other big issue. And it takes a long time to develop land. And lots are getting a lot more expensive. And with the construction going on with Foxconn, they're using a lot of materials. They're using a lot of resources. Just recently, the cost of stone, like stone aggregate, has went up like 30%, just because Everyone is using it. There's not that many stone plants in the area. Foxconn took a whole plant to supply. They've had Hulquist stone up by me. The other day they had trucks lined up, just hauling stone. My grading contractor just told me the other day that used to be able to call like the night before to get trucks lined up for a job. He has to call 3 days in advance now just to make sure that they have trucks available for him. So we haven't even started using all the stone that we need for that project. So it's only going to get worse. So we need truckers as well. And then the last one is legislation. So legislation, the average cost added to a new home due to local, state, and federal regulation is $84,671. This was a study done by the National Association of Home Builders in 2015. So you're adding $84,000 the cost of every home. And there's a lot of inefficiencies. There's a lot of things that we have to deal with, just developing land. It takes way too long. So if you buy a parcel of land and you pay $1 million for it, you don't get to develop it the next day. It might take you a year or 2 years. So you're paying interest on all that land, and then anytime there's a change or a delay by the municipality, that adds cost. And unfortunately, a lot of our legislators don't understand that. And they don't understand what the true cost is of changing and delaying projects or adding extra requirements on. And that all gets passed through the customer. And that's why new housing can be unaffordable, especially for entry-level buyers, workforce housing, those type of things.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that workers making $53,000 a year, he could maybe afford a $350,000 house. What is the average cost of a newly built house these days?
To be honest, it's really tough to build anything for under 400. 450 is kind of like the new normal for construction. So if you look at it that way, even if we got the land for free, it'd be very hard to build in the price point that these buyers are going to need. So without change, without drastic change, not only at the municipal level and the requirements, but also just the way us builders and us developers develop things too. We have to look at doing things completely different and going outside of the box.
Well, and if you buy land, what are some of the biggest holdups at the local level? Is it getting your plat approved? Is that sort of thing? Zoning?
Yeah, now each area is going to be different, but typically when you do a development, you're going to have multiple bodies that interact with you and give you opinions and direction. So you're going to have your local, which is going to have their building codes and their desires and their zoning, and then you may have the county level, which may conflict with the local level. So then you go to one and you make the changes, and then you go back to the other one, and then they're not happy. So you kind of are like in a little bit of a ping pong match sometimes. And then you have federal regulations as well. So you have like the EPA, OSHA, those type of things, and they're pushing as well. So I recently experienced an issue in one of my developments that I'm working on where I've got the local municipality and they're on board with everything, and then the county comes in, and the county's trying to pressure me to do different things, make the project more expensive. And then the DNR comes in, they say, you don't have jurisdiction over it, which is pretty interesting to have the DNR now be the easier municipality or easier body to work with, which that never was the case, but now they are. But then when you have like a county government and they're not getting their way, then they start putting pressure on the local. And so you get just caught in the middle on this as a developer, and like I said, those delays, they just have huge costs and consequences, and we really need to get our elected officials aware of that, because that's one of the challenges, and we don't have that many developers around anymore. We lost a few of those as well with the recession. It's risky. You have to, like, if a development costs another like $1.5 million to add into the project for your roads and things, you have to either bond or you have to have a letter of credit for that same amount. So not only do you have to pay the amount, the $1.5 million, to add to that project, you have to also be able to secure that same amount plus another 20%, just to make sure in case you go anywhere or you go under, that project gets completed. So it really limits the pool of people that can do that work.
Yes, and I'm sure everybody here is somewhat familiar with bonding and all of that, and of course Elliot here is very familiar with it. But something else that he wanted to talk about a little bit today is safety, and what contractors need to think about if they're going to be working on this job, what they need to do from the safety perspective.
Absolutely. I think certainly construction Industries. Might better break this. No, I think it leads a lot of industries when it comes to safety. I mean, folks in the construction. All right, we're back in business. I think folks in the construction field have really been leading the way in safety for the most part, which is fantastic. Those job sites can be dangerous. And yeah, I think in particular, a job site this size where we've got 10,000 construction workers moving on and off of the job site on a regular basis, safety's got to be a priority. The fact of the matter is a lot of contractors won't even be able to set foot on sites like this if they don't have their safety house in order. In talking to some contacts out there in the marketplace, there's certainly going to be a robust safety program in place at Gilbane. They're going to have training on site, and they're going to have pretty extensive intake documentation that has to be provided. I believe they're doing that online to streamline a good bit of that. But, contractors that aren't paying attention to this piece of the business are going to run into some challenges, and not just on the Foxconn job, but on the jobs to follow. And I think it'd be fair to say we'll see a number of larger companies follow, or certainly hope from an economic development standpoint we see some larger companies follow in this market. They're going to have similar standards, so I think it's going to be important that you're getting the right training in place. You're getting the right employees in place that can absorb that training and act on it, and that you're following up on the accident investigation and the risk management infrastructure that needs to be in place to thrive on a job like this. The safety and risk management piece really ties into a topic that I think we've been talking about across the panel here, and that's the labor shortage. Because I can tell you construction, the folks in this room I'm sure know, construction's not alone in this challenge. Manufacturing's starving for labor just like construction is. Construction is right now, and as David alluded to, a lot of the construction employees migrated into manufacturing during the recession. So I think having those safety policies in place and the impact it can have on controlling costs is going to become imperative as this issue becomes more challenging, because if we look at what's going to eventually have to draw labor into the construction space, a lot of it is going to be increases in wages. Wages increase, one of the largest components of your insurance spend is your workers' compensation. It's going to drive that cost up. So if you're not ahead of the curve on the safety piece and you're not keeping your experience in line, I think we're going to see a lot of pressure on those rates, and we're going to have contractors that are basically phased out of being able to bid on some of these jobs. So, not only is this an issue today, and certainly the most important factor of getting your folks home at the end of the day, but I think it's going to be an issue that may snowball as the labor shortage continues to be a challenge and those wages rise to pull people into the market.
Yeah, didn't you, I think when we were talking on the phone the other day, you mentioned something too about if you are a company that has had some safety trouble in the recent past, particularly, and you're bidding on this job, you will probably be expected to, explain why it happened, and B, what you plan to do to prevent it from happening again.
That certainly could be the case, and I think, especially as we see some contractors team up to tackle the the job of this size and then the different components, there's going to be a lot of questions going around about whether it's where the mod rate is or a little bit about what your incident rates look like. And, I would certainly advise clients and folks in the market to be prepared to speak to those issues, to be able to tell a story about maybe a particular claim or a particular trend in your claim's history. And how you've handled it. I mean, it's something we do every day in talking with underwriters. Is you have to be able to explain trends. You have to be able to communicate what's been done from a corrective action standpoint to deal with either frequency or severity. So I think that's definitely a conversation that folks should be ready to have.
Okay. Now, Kelly, I know Nate touched on this quite a bit in his introductory remarks, but from your perspective, what's the latest on the project? And could you tell us a little bit about Wisconsin First and how have things been going so far on the project overall from the WEDC's perspective? Imagine swimmingly. They've been going swimmingly.
Sure. So I just want to follow up just real quick on what Elliot was talking about, especially as it affects manufacturing. We talk about the labor shortage. So a couple of the other things that we're working on and helping out with is looking at productivity for manufacturers, and then also Industry 4.0 adoption. So the only way we're going to be able to meet the labor demands now and coming is if companies become more productive and can do more with less people. And so we have several initiatives, our Industry 4.0 readiness plan, and then also a transformational productivity initiative in partnership with the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, because not only do we need the bodies in here, but you also need to be able to just do more with those single bodies that you're bringing in. So really important to look at it collectively and holistically of how you solve those problems. So as far as the update, I'm not sure. I bet Nate could give a solid update on how all the progress is going. But it's been really exciting to see Foxconn do their announcement for the additional investments across the state too. So the Innovation Center in Green Bay, Eau Claire. I think what's exciting and what people can see beyond the construction, which is obviously so important and a big piece here, is the ecosystem that they're looking to build, not only in the supply chain piece, but the innovation piece. And that is a great catalyst for the Wisconsin ecosystem. With these innovation centers they're putting in, the types of jobs they'll house there are engineering jobs and creative type jobs. Not only are those really good paying jobs, but they're going to create new technologies and spin out new technologies. They have their new Smart Cities initiative that I think you're going to be hearing more about. They're getting ready to launch. And that's working with university faculty and students to get the latest and greatest technology out of the university, and how do they get that commercialized and be able to adapt that. And so I think all of that is really exciting and sometimes gets lost in the bigger picture of what's happening here when we get talking in the micro piece of where people are going to live, which obviously very, very important, but also to be looking at how this affects other pieces of the ecosystem in Wisconsin. So just some of the numbers I think people like to hear about, especially with the Wisconsin First. They are meeting all the deliverables there, which is fantastic. 60% of subcontracting executed already has been with Wisconsin businesses. And another 10% of 10% of that is specifically in the Racine County area as well. So again, that's a tremendous impact. The other thing Gilbane has made a commitment to is hiring Wisconsin residents, right? So 70% of total work hours already performed will be by Wisconsin residents. And we're seeing that Wisconsin First really take effect. And 94% of the contracts that have already been let are Wisconsin-based businesses. So that really is, it's not just a token that you hear, it is really something that everyone is putting into action and keeping first, and it is something that we make sure is first as well. There are checks as the progress goes to completion, or the project goes to completion. So there's certifications and verifications that we do along the way to make sure that all that takes place. There are independent auditors that will make sure that those requirements are met as well along the way. And I think just the last number I have here for you is this came from Gilbane with their estimates that they are employing workers from at least 60 Wisconsin counties across the board. So again, while bulk of concentration is here, keep in mind that this has a ripple effect even. Great title. Yeah. 60 counties across the board that have employees working on this project already. So exciting stuff.
Yeah, you talking about Wisconsin First and all the workers from in-state, just not so much a question, but probably bears repeating every Foxconn event that I've attended or watched. They emphasize over and over again, if you're submitting a bid on this project, you need to have that Wisconsin First element explaining how you're going to help them meet those goals.
Right. So again, and like I said, there are independent audits that will be done to make sure all of that is in place. And so it is, it's a commitment that the company has made. It's also a commitment that WEDC has made to be able to check it along the way and make sure that it is being fulfilled. But the executives that put this project into place have a great relationship. My boss, Mark Hogan, who's our secretary and CEO of WEDC, have a tremendous, really close relationship working with these people. So there's a lot of trust built in there too. And I see that. I think you see that in some of the events when they're together. And that's great to see, and not only great to see, but what you're seeing, the result of that is these additional investments across the state. They didn't have to come in and build innovation centers, but that's that's what they want to do, and they want to do that because of the relationship and because of the trust they have with the people that they built this deal on. So again, I think Wisconsin is in a tremendous advantage position. And I think the one other thing I'll just add to this too is we talked a little bit beforehand, is everybody sees this as very transformational for Southeast Wisconsin, for the state of Wisconsin, for this area, and it absolutely is. But I think you also need to take into perspective that this is transformational for Foxconn as well. They don't go and put in a $10 billion investment every day and hire 13,000 employees every day. They have to figure some things out, and it's a learning process for them as well. And I just think it's good to have that full picture as you're looking at how this is going to play out and what's happening. So, Wisconsin first.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I have some other questions, but I don't know how we're doing on time. Did we want to have a question and answer session, or we still got time for some more questions up here? Okay. All right. Well, I guess we'll go to where are we on this? I'm sorry. I lost my place. Yeah, we'll go back to Jim. So one provision in the tax reform bill that you've been talking about has to do with opportunity zones. This item has received very little publicity, it seems. How do these opportunity zones work, and will these apply in Southeast Wisconsin?
Good. Thank you. Good question with it. This is a provision that, again, hasn't received the attention that the lower tax rates and some of the other items that were in the tax bill was when it was passed last year. But what Congress wanted to do is for areas that have either poverty or low economic activity, they wanted to encourage investment into those areas for new businesses or business property in there. So they put these opportunity zones in there. So for individuals that either have a capital gain and want to take the proceeds and reinvest that back into an opportunity zone, or just invest in them in there, they can either defer the tax that they would have recognized from a gain, or in fact avoid the tax altogether if they put money in these opportunity zones with it. But the key with these opportunity zones is to take a note from what David had, is location with it, is it's certain areas that are around the country, really. It's not just in Wisconsin, but across the country, that are designated as being one of these opportunity zones that have that low economic activity and want to be available to get this investment with it. So I think it was in April, all the states had to submit tracks around their own states as to these ones that they felt should qualify for it. They sent them into the IRS, and they went through those. And I think it was about a month ago that the IRS released, here are the opportunity zones for the whole country by state that you can have that. And it's very specific as to the census tract and to the location where these are. And I think there's some probably down in the Southeast Wisconsin area. But I think what you're going to need to do is find out, okay, what's that specific tract, and then what happens is you individuals will invest in an opportunity zone fund. That fund will then invest in these businesses. So there's a lot of details that the IRS still needs to provide on it as to how you reinvest those capital gains, how do you find out these businesses that are in those areas. But I think you're going to see that there will be, again, to steal the term, an opportunity there from tax standpoint to put some investment in there that's going to go into some of these communities. Again, some may be in here that are affected just because of the Foxconn being in the area, and they may find out that this new business that they've added or this new development may fall within that area, and it may then provide some opportunity for others to invest in it. So I think it's one that has received, again, less publicity, but over this coming year you'll see more and more written about it. And then, again, investors and businesses trying to fall within those specific opportunity zones.
And what about state tax incentives? Are there any that businesses in the audience today should be particularly aware of?
Yeah, most of the changes, again, we talked about, again, last year's tax reform bill was on the federal side, some of the federal changes for the lower rates and some of the deductions. Again, Wisconsin does have some incentives as well, and the companies should be aware of it. One is we talked about the R&D credit that is available for companies that invest in new and improved technologies within the business. That's available for federal. That's a permanent credit that's available. Wisconsin has a similar credit that dovetails on it. The only thing is the research needs to be done in Wisconsin. So if you've got a manufacturer or a software development company that's in Wisconsin, is doing R&D work. Not only can they get a federal credit, but they can get a state R&D credit. To what Kelly had mentioned before, some of these ones trying to get this new 4.0 manufacturing and be more efficient and new processes, that could be one type of work that even if it's the same product, but it's a new process they've developed to come up with that, they may be entitled to an R&D credit. It could be a federal and perhaps even a state R&D credit. So that's one that businesses should be aware of. The second one is what they call the MAC, or the Manufacturing and Agriculture Credit. Again, that's a credit that's designed for Wisconsin businesses for either manufacturing or agriculture work in the state that they get, and that credit essentially offsets the income that you earn from the business. So the business, whatever the tax is related to that, they can offset really their whole tax related to that if it's for manufacturing or agriculture. And again, the credit's been out about 7-8 years, but you still find some businesses that you mention it to them and they get a blank stare that they're not aware of that credit. So the MAC credit is an important one that could really, for a manufacturer that is in Wisconsin here, should be aware of it and take advantage of it. It really eliminates their Wisconsin tax on the income that they're generating from manufacturing, as well as for agriculture in Wisconsin. So those are two that are important. Again, the R&D and the MAC credit for Wisconsin businesses.
Great. Yeah, very useful information. On the topic of Madison and the legislature, I think we'll come around to our last question here with David. Just asking, you were talking about one of the 4 L's is legislation, not litigation. I was about to say that. But what could lawmakers do you think, to help a little bit?
Sure. Well, I think one of the first things we need to do is we've got to have our local legislators be pro-housing. Because that is a major issue, not only just in the Foxconn area, but there's other areas of the state where affordable housing, that just doesn't exist. So, getting builders, developers, and everybody to the table, we have to start looking at changing things more broadly. So we've kind of always had the mentality of, well, we've always done it this way, right? I mean, that's when you go into a municipality, well, this is what the code's on the book. This is how we've always done it. Well, a lot of those codes were developed in the 1950s. When we had the post-war boom. So, they created certain size streets and things like that. And it was done intentionally because back then when you built houses, you didn't necessarily have attached garages or maybe even a 2-car garage. Now we're building houses with 2, 3, 4-car garages, further setbacks. So we still have these streets that are ridiculously wide. And it's done on purpose because they want to have parking on both sides of the street. Well, we don't need that anymore. Not when you have a 4-car garage and your house is 75 feet off the road. You can park a lot of people there. So let's look at, condensing these, more density, bringing the houses a little bit closer together, smaller minimums for the houses. We've got to start building smaller. So those kind of things, we can do that, and that will greatly help the affordability. And then we need faster approvals. We need more flexibility on issues, especially when you start getting, like I mentioned before, when you get in the ping pong match and you're between the DNR and the county and the local and the federal government. We all need to work together on this. So that's one of the things. We just built a house in Pleasant Prairie, and it's weird, but like when you build in a rural area, they don't have a sanitarian there. So when we were trying to get a septic permit, they had to send it to a state sanitarian. Well, they only have 3 state sanitarians throughout Wisconsin. We waited 6 weeks just to get a septic permit. Normally it takes like 2 weeks in a normal municipality. So you wait 6 weeks when the cost of materials are shooting up. Now the cost of this house just keeps rising, and there's nothing you can do about it because you have to sit there and wait. So the speed is probably the most important thing out of anything. So, and then the last thing would be, there's 2 more things. One would be, assistance with financing. So whether, creating TIF districts or TID districts, maybe the municipality would be willing to come in and help maybe offset some of the costs of the development, whether it's roadways or things like that, that would help. And then anything with skilled labor. I know we're working on a program called the Home Builders Institute, where they bring this training facility in. They can bring it into prisons or schools, and they teach the actual skills. Because you can't just throw somebody on a job site right away and expect them to miter, a door or a jam or things like that. You need hands-on experience right in the field. So we need help in that area as well.
Can you use TIF districts for residential projects in Wisconsin? Is that allowed? Do you know?
I'm not super familiar with it because that's not an arena I typically play in, but there's a project that I am discussing where it's a TID district, so it's a mixed use of residential and multifamily. So I believe that you can, depending on the usage of it.
Yeah, obviously, if it's going forward, you can in some circumstances at least. Well, I've certainly asked enough questions here, I think, but didn't know if anybody out there had any. I don't know, Joe, if you want to go around.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, we'll come around. Otherwise, the panelists will be here to answer your questions.
Yeah.
Anybody have any questions now for the panelists?
Hi, my name is Heather Haas, and I'm representing Gartner. We're a technology research and advisory firm, and I'm very pleased to hear about some of the work that's going to be done around innovation and technology. And I'm just kind of curious if anybody also maybe has some updates of what's going on in Milwaukee. I know they purchased the Northwestern Mutual building, and just curious what might be going on downtown.
All right. Well, I mean, obviously they purchased that building is for their corporate headquarters, right? So that's more of the headquarters functioning. And they do have some people in there, I believe. I know they have a good number of people here locally, both working in that area, the headquarters side, but also working here, getting the project up and built and everything. I don't know if I could give you anything more specific about what's actually happening in the building. Construction, they're getting ready to bring more people in, right? But they're kind of wherever they need to be, which is great. And as far as the innovation piece, there's a lot of ways you could get connected into that, especially through the Smart City project that they're doing, or competition, actually. And just a quick overview of that might be helpful. And there is some information out there, but I think they're going to make the announcement here pretty soon that'll have more of the details with it. But essentially anything around smart cities, and that's anything from sensors to there's all kinds of technology involved with that, right? And the idea is to kind of get that technology out and see what people are coming up with, and then again commercialize that and see what they can use as well. The other thing I think that's interesting too, just looking at the broader picture of Foxconn, is it's not people get kind of stuck on this this concept of the TV screens. But there's a lot of applications. So when you start talking about technology, you look at autonomous vehicles. There's a really interesting video out there that I saw around when you start designing autonomous vehicles, not only the technology that goes into that, but when you get into a new one that they're looking at these designs. I think BMW has one out. It's a video that you can Google. But look at all the touch screens that are in an autonomous vehicle. Okay, so that's an area of focus that they're probably going to be looking at, because they're going to have the latest and greatest technology. And with the 8K 5G, so the 8K is the I don't know, it's not as easy as the pixels, but it's how well you can see, right? Better than the human eye. And then the 5K is the speed of which the internet and data transfers. So having that technology just has so many applications across the board, and applications we don't even know about yet. And I think that's what they're trying to figure out, right? So that's really the fun part.
Yeah, definitely. And also, I do know that there's a request for proposals out right now for that headquarters building, right, Nate? And Nate wrote a story about it, so he could, probably at least lead you in the direction of some more useful information. We'll talk to him. So anybody else have any questions in particular?
My name is Wenbian Yuan. I'm from Dakota Intertech. I have several questions. I think mostly toward Kelly, but whoever else can answer. One of them is the smart city that you mentioned. How would other developers coordinate with them to benefit their smart city overall plan? Like, what should we consider? We should buy some land around them, or we should consider building some apartment around them, or we wait until they have the plan and then we decide what to do? So I don't know if that's something you can answer. And then is there a state demographics for predictions and, future next 5 years or next 2 years demographic studies from the state? You're a strategist, so maybe that's
Sure,
something.
demographic studies focusing on,
On this Foxconn-induced or Foxconn ripple effect, future changes, current and future changes.
sure, absolutely. So MMAC has a study that they did recently that I'm sure it's online. I can't tell you exactly where it is, but I'm sure if you Google it or reach out to MMAC, they'd be happy to connect you to it. They're called economic impact studies. University of Wisconsin-Madison did one. I'm sure all of those are online and available. Again, they will give you a sense of the number of additional jobs that will be there, give you a sense of the dollar investments. They're pretty comprehensive. Again, looking at the labor market, there were a lot of things done before Foxconn came to be able to show them the labor pool that is actually available today. But there are a lot of forecasts around what the labor pool is needed, not only for Foxconn, but for the state of Wisconsin across the board. I think is interesting. Are there any manufacturers in the room? I was curious. It's all mostly construction and okay. All right, that's great. So Wisconsin has the second largest concentration of manufacturing in the country. And we want to make sure we maintain that global competitiveness and keep our manufacturers supported so that they can not only stay in business, but be globally competitive. And we can grow that. We have about 9,000 manufacturers in the state of Wisconsin. And about 150 of those, that's not an exact number, it varies between 135 and 165 of those companies have over 500 employees. So that perspective is 8,000 and whatever that is, right? Companies have less than 500 employees. So the bulk of our manufacturing across the state is small to medium-sized manufacturers. And that's important to realize because the resources and capabilities, capital investment options for small and medium-sized manufacturers is a greatly different picture than, say, the Foxconns, the Rockwells, the Oshkoshs of the world, right? And so looking at how we better tie all that together and maintain our global competitiveness for manufacturing in Wisconsin, we really try to look at what do we need to do for small and medium-sized manufacturers. And what I think is really going to be interesting tied into that is this innovation piece and the smart cities, right? Because anytime you start some kind of new technology, you don't start at mass producing 5,000 pieces, right? You start with prototyping, you start with research institutions, you start with figuring out how to make it in the first place, and then you start with contract manufacturers, which are also very high in number in Wisconsin.
As a further clarification, let's say we are a small developer, we want to develop some apartment buildings. Should we consider like Mount Pleasant, or we should wait until Foxconn has an overall master plan, we see how we can fit into it?
I think I'm going to defer to David on that one. He's going to be more of an expert on the residential piece and all of that, and forecasting real estate. It's not really my house, sorry.
I just wanted to clarify your question. What you were looking at areas to locate a company?
To see if we have some places we can buy a land and develop apartment buildings or single-family buildings.
Oh, sure.
Is there an overall strategy that we can coordinate with Foxconn?
Yeah, as far as areas, I mean, people are going to obviously live, where they want to live, and they're going to pick the areas. Now, obviously, the closer that you can get to the facility, I think in a way is good because, shorter commutes. You might have a lot of workers too, or if this would be an opportunity for someone if there's transportation, where you could have a community or an apartment where they can have some sort of transportation right to Foxconn. That would be terrific because I think in other manufacturing areas, I was at Quad Graphics recently, and they're having trouble with labor as well. And what's happening is for more of the entry-level positions, they want to hire somebody on, but they don't necessarily have a good way to actually get to work. They don't all own cars and things like that. So, ways to commute people to the facility. I mean, you're talking about 13,000 workers. That's a lot of people that got to get to work every day. So, I think proximity is important there. There certainly is a lot of land available in the area. When you drive through it, there's land on all sides of the corridor. A lot of it, like I said, there's been offers and a lot of closings on things. So, you can work with a local agent in the area, and they can help identify the right parcels. It's got to have the right zoning, of course, to get the right pieces. But there's definitely a lot of opportunity especially for apartments, maybe housing if you've got a new concept, or you might even see a national outfit come in and really come in and roll through and do a new concept that we haven't maybe seen before for
But
housing.
there's no, you don't know any plans like what Foxconn is planning to do themselves, right? Maybe they want to build, facilities to host 20,000 people. Then
Sure.
there's no room for us to do
Yeah.
anything.
Well, I mean, we could get back to the point where, back in the heyday of the United States when you had workforce housing, where you literally, the manufacturer had housing on site, and you had a special deal if you worked there and you could live there. That could be a possibility. I mean, that would make some sense as well.
All right, so we don't really know yet.
Not really, no.
Thank you.
I'm Jim Woodison. I'm the regional sales manager for JX Truck Center. We're a Peterbilt dealership, and we have a fairly substantial footprint in the Wisconsin area, and we're a homegrown business. I have two questions. First one for the EDC. Real briefly, can you expand on Wisconsin First as it applies to what the requirements are? What was the discussion on how much has to be bought in Wisconsin, and how does that benefit independent contractors? For example, many of the contractors want to buy a truck. Why buy in Wisconsin? That's my first question. Second question is what has the EDC and the rest of the community done for shovel-ready property for companies like mine that would like to get started now organically, because there is an infrastructure issue. All these trucks floating around need to be fixed, and everything from CNG to all the green different initiatives. Following up on his comments too, is we are really trying to decide what next, from labor resources and so on. So shovel ready, and can you expand on Wisconsin First?
Sure. So shovel ready, we do actually have certified shovel ready sites across the state. That is something that's been around in economic development for some time. Are you asking to help identify shovel ready, or you have your shovel and you're ready? So you want to know if you should go forward?
Is there property, commercial property, already zoned and ready for corporations to
Sure.
expand in the Racine County proper? And I know that you represent the state, and I have worked with the local EDC.
Yes.
But I'm looking for a generality. Is there a master plan for shovel ready as we continue to grow?
Okay, so there is a master source of data to tell you where the shovel-ready sites are. As far as a specific land use plan, I know that there is information out there of what the Foxconn property has. What you might be looking for is what the land use plan is for Racine County if you're looking in that specific area. But yes, we can certainly connect you to those resources. I probably couldn't tell you right now where those lots of lands are, but we have a database that we manage across the state for all economic development organizations in the state, where they list their available properties, and you will see if it is shovel ready or not, or some of them will have pads. It just varies, right? Some are not shovel ready, but we certainly have that database that we can connect you to. That's not a problem at all. If you'll see me afterwards, I'll give you some information on that. And then your other question was about Wisconsin First and the finer details of that. I think as well, that information, you would find a little bit more detail on that on the wisconvalley.gov site. I'm not sure I could break down all the details and the numbers off the top of my head for you, but I'd be happy to follow up with you and get you that more detailed information that you're looking for. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for our panelists? Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Paul Scott with Symbion Engineers and Construction. This might be a question for Elliot and maybe David. So we have Foxconn coming up, but the reality is construction and business and development, it's not going to change. We have all of those outlying general business that's happening in Milwaukee and Wisconsin that's already creating this shortage in construction, well, in all trades and in all areas that you guys had mentioned. But as this starts to ramp up and we see Foxconn come in and also have an impact, how do we manage, we have these larger tiered contractors that are primarily going to be completely busy and they're not going to be available, which is our normal go-to as far as just keeping things on track, good construction policies and practices. What that means is we have these smaller tier, maybe up and coming or just general small contractors that we are left to work with within the market, which is a great thing. But with that, we have a lot of companies that maybe don't have the expertise or the manpower or the ability to manage things like insurance or policies or general practice that we need to make sure that jobs are done efficiently, effectively, and safely. So in that, I guess, do you have any impact or thoughts on how we're going to manage this kind of shift as we have to really look at the labor pool from a different perspective?
I'll take the first part, and maybe you can take the second part of that question, if that sounds good. So I think your first part of your question was, how are we going to manage, the labor shortage that we already are having with all this extra work going on? And what we're already seeing is a lot of the mid-size and larger companies just taking on more work, and we're not seeing a lot of growth yet from smaller companies. And so what may happen is as these larger companies, as they continue to do things and their staff gets more seasoned and experienced, I think we'll see some splitting off of key people going off and taking advantage of these opportunities to form new businesses. Right now, we're not really seeing it yet. Even just on things like framing and masonry, it's like if you're a mid-sized company, everyone's just growing and they have more. My framing contractor, he's split into 3 crews already, and is managing our work that way versus where he used to just have 1 crew. So we're seeing a lot of that. We're seeing builders taking on more work. So, but I suspect as time goes on, these people that get a lot of experience, they'll kind of fracture off a little bit as well and form their own companies. And we're going to see new companies come into the area as well. I think, we're already hearing of a lot of trades coming up from Illinois to work with existing companies already. They're not building as much as we are. We have a lot less unemployment than they do. So we're seeing them coming up already. So I think we'll see that as well. As far as the training insurance, do you want to? Okay.
Thank you. So I'm getting a little outside of my sandbox here, but I'll dust off my economics degree and see if I can speak to your question. I think Kelly hit a topic earlier that's probably going to come into play here, and that's productivity. I think we're going to have to see some innovation across all industries, construction in particular, when we start to get really strapped for not only labor but capacity for some of the, I'll call them first-tier contractors. So I would certainly agree. You're going to see folks move into this space. You're going to see the up-and-comers. A couple names locally come to mind that I think are climbing up the ladder right now to compete with the Gilbanes and on jobs this size. But I think it's going to come down to the productivity, innovation, and frankly, leveraging technology. If we look at not only solving the labor shortage by putting training on site and bringing essentially green folks in and training them right there on the job site and putting them to work, I think that in a sense can leverage and shorten some of that cycle of getting folks job site ready. But leveraging some of the technology, whether it be off the top of my head, I would say the drone technology to give some of these job site managers a bigger reach in a day to go out and see a variety of jobs. So, I certainly hope we'd start to see some of that impact and grow as it's already growing in construction. But again, a little out of my sandbox here. That's the couple things that come to mind. And I think in any event, it's going to be exciting. Kelly also touched on how Foxconn's really going to impact our manufacturing environment, some of the new ideas and strategies and that they're not only doing today, but they're probably going to have to figure out how to do as they plug in here. And I think we'll see the same in the construction space and other tangential industries.
See, Elliot, insurance isn't that boring after all. I think we're going to have to, did somebody, Kelly, did you want to?
I just want to add one more thing. So there's so much talk about training and the labor, and I would be amiss if I didn't add this. So one of our partners, the Department of Workforce Development, they have a great training program. It's called the Fast Forward Grant. You can use it in the construction industry. You can use it in the manufacturing industry, across all industries. It's a great program. It's a grant program. If you haven't used it, if you don't know about it, look it up. Reach out to me. I'll get you connected with them. It will give you money it will give you grant dollars to train your people. It will give you dollars to train the trainer. And there's a lot of flexibility with that grant program. And while it is certainly utilized, I think it could be utilized more. And it's a matter of people understanding that they can actually access it. So I encourage you again, it's called Fast Forward Grant. And if you just Google that or go to the DWD website, you'll see that on there. And it's run consistently now. Used to be you had to be specific industry a certain time of year, but now it's open all year round, and they do the awards quarterly. So I would encourage you to check that out.
That's great, thank you. And I think we're quickly running out of time here, so I think we'll have to leave it there. But thank you to our panelists, fascinating discussion, and thank you to our sponsors, and thank you all for coming. Lunch is served over on the table there. Please feel free to hang around as long as you want. Our panelists will be around if you have any additional questions. Thank you.